counseling services to the uninsured and underinsured persons living in the Chesters, Berks, and Lancaster counties. And that vision became a reality 4 years ago when Stillwater's Ministries opened its doors here at Conestoga Mennonite Church. At this time, since opening our doors, we have provided nearly 5,000 hours of counseling services and have saved clients hundreds of thousands of dollars. All of our services are provided at no cost to our clients. We see clients with an array of concerns, individuals suffering with depression, fears, anxieties, issues with self-esteem, and some who just need a little life coaching. Services have included counseling individually, couples counseling, and even family counseling. We have served individuals as young as, and I'm serving him right now, 6 years old to about 90 years old. About a year into our ministry, we started to see an increase in the number of women suffering from domestic violence and sexual abuse and physical and emotional abuse. So 2 years ago, we established a program we call Lilies of the Valleys. In that program, we provide counseling, education, and safe housing for individuals who suffer from domestic violence. In very difficult times, in difficult situations, we provide security and help. Lives are being changed, and in some cases, lives have been saved, literally. People can feel abandoned and ignored during very hard times, especially when they do not have the necessary financial resources to pay for the help they need. When this ministry started 4 years ago, the intent was for me alone to provide counseling services. But it didn't take too long to quickly realize that there were times when the touch of a counselor from a woman's perspective was much needed. And I knew of no other or no better or no wiser counselor than that of my wife, Jill. Jill, why don't you stand? So Jill joined me in the ministry shortly after we opened our doors. Jill has been acquainted with our guest speaker this evening since her days at Asbury College almost 40 years ago, when they both graduated in 1976. And I understand there may be somebody here who also graduated from Asbury in 1976 as well. And you didn't even know each other, I don't think. Well, after graduating, Jill moved to Texas and Artie headed to New York City. After 9/11, Artie returned to Lancaster where his parents live. We were very grateful that Artie survived that horrible day in September. And we're also grateful that he is willing tonight to share his story with us. So please help me in welcoming our guest and our friend, Artie Van Wy. And his new friend, Chester.
Ranger, come on, Ranger. Come on. All right, come on. Turn around. Okay, sit down. Sit. Lie down. Good boy. So, yes, this is my new companion. This is Ranger. Tomorrow will be a week that we have been together. He is a service dog for me because I suffer from PTSD. And for those of you who associate PTSD mostly with veterans, I'm just here to tell you that trauma can affect you in very many different ways. And experiencing 9/11 was certainly a traumatic experience for me, in so much so that I still think about it every day. And having this service dog, I have been wanting this for, about 2 years, and the wait's incredibly long to be able to get them. But he's here to help me when I have nightmares, when I'm feeling anxious and having anxiety attacks, or just when I'm filled with sadness and despair. He's there to lick my face, and what can you do when a dog licks your face? You have to smile. Many people wonder why I do this, why I speak, because they say, well, doesn't it get to you, reliving all this? And in a way it does, but it's also somewhat healing, and it brings its own rewards. Friday, I spoke at Manheim Township High School, and just today I got an email from a student there, and I just want to read just a little bit of what she had in her email to me. She says, "I thought you gave a phenomenal presentation at my school this past Friday. Your presentation was unlike anything I have ever read, heard, or seen about 9/11. From your story, I got a deeper sense of what the event was really like, and it helped me better understand the tragedy. Your presentation was incredibly informative and insightful, and helped the students of Manheim Township and I better understand the event that changed America forever. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and speak at our high school. We all appreciate it very much." Students are one of my favorite people to talk to. Someone like this who, if she was not born, was certainly just a toddler when it happened. Yet I find students of that age with a real thirst of wanting to know more about 9/11, because, face it, that day has shaped the world that they are growing up in, a world that's much different than the one most of us grew up in. I never had heard the word terrorist, I don't think, growing up, and now for them it's part of their everyday vocabulary. The one thing I regret when it comes to students, but maybe with some of you adults it's different, is seeing that cityscape, those twin towers. That was the first view I had when I drove into New York. I drove in there in November of 1977, actually just for a 2-day visit, and ended up staying for 26 years. I fell in love with the city. Even more so, I fell in love with the World Trade Center, with those majestic towers. And between the towers, that golden sphere right in the middle of the plaza that was surrounded by benches where people would sit and eat at lunchtime. Now, I'd been to the World Trade Center, often when people came to visit friends or family and they wanted to go down, and then I took them down just as another tourist. I lived in Midtown Manhattan my whole time in New York, so I was never down there that much. And how I ended up down there says a lot to me about just the decisions we make in life, how we have no idea how they may affect us. I worked for a law firm for 13 years. I was a word processor. It was a mid-sized firm of about 50 lawyers in Midtown Manhattan. And in January of 2001, they announced to us that they had decided they were going to merge with a much larger firm, and also that not everyone would be going. I was one of several word processors, and I was the only one who was asked to go along with them to the new firm. And they said, take a few days to think about it. So I was at one of those crossroads where I really didn't know what to do. I thought, I could start all over again. I had moved there to become an actor, and that had not turned out. I thought maybe I could return to that or just reinvent myself. But I decided that a weekly paycheck, benefits, paid vacation, and a 401k plan was much more important. So I said yes. I took the job and I'd go with them, not knowing that that decision was going to alter the rest of my life. I grew to love being there. We started our move there on June 1st, 2001. So I'd only been there 3 months before 9/11 happened. But in those 3 months, I grew to love the World Trade Center. And all that it was more than just those towers. It was buildings surrounding it. There was a mall underneath it with restaurants, shopping centers. At lunchtime in the summer, especially, people would be out, like that, sitting on the benches eating their lunch, and there'd be a hot dog vendor or pretzel guy, and just joyous. And in the summer, one thing they would do is they would erect a stage and have noontime concerts. One day it would be jazz music, the next day doo-wop. And many times I would be sitting there and I'd think, here I am in the middle of New York City in my lunch time, sitting here listening to Peter Noon of Herman's Hermits and Mark Lindsay of Paul Revere and the Raiders. So, and it's nice to have an audience who knows who I'm talking about. But that was one of the great things about that. I had a routine that I took every day. As I said, I lived in Midtown. I lived on West 43rd Street at that time. So first thing in the daytime, I would take the subway down to the subway station down at Chambers Street. And when I'd come up out of the subway, my first stop would be at one of the coffee carts. And the coffee man knew me so well that by within a week's time, before I even got to his cart, he'd have my coffee ready. It was a half decaf, half regular, sweet and low on the side, and a little cream. And he'd always greet me, give it to me, I'd pay him, and he'd say, "Have a good day, my friend." So I'd leave him, and then I'd go to my favorite newsstand and get my newspaper for the day. And I would go into the plaza area where that sphere was, that area, and sit on one of the benches. I tried to get there around 8 o'clock, a half hour early. And I'd sit there and drink my coffee and read the newspaper. And I remember that whole summer as being a glorious summer. Perhaps there were bad days where it rained or something, but I don't remember that. I just remember the joy of just kind of sitting there, taking it all in, looking at all the people hurry by, some scurrying to work, noticing all the tourists, which were obvious to pick out because they all had cameras around their necks. It was just a glorious time. And then about 8:30, I would head up to work, and this is where I worked, 195 Broadway, which was behind the Millennium Hotel, which was across from the World Trade Center. That is a corner shot of my building, and this shot here shows you how close. Here's my office building, and there's the North Tower. So you can see the close proximity of the World Trade Center to where I work. In fact, this will show you even more. This here in red, that was my office building. And here was the whole World Trade Center. And remember I said it was made up of several different buildings. The ones in yellow, those are the two towers, of course. Here's the center where I would spend lunchtime. The stage was probably over about there. So I was up on the 23rd floor in my office on 9/11, and suddenly we heard an explosive sound, and our building actually shook. And I remember all of us just stopping and looking at one another with that, what was that? Look on our faces. And someone said, was that thunder? And someone said, did something explode? And what it sounded like to me was as if a huge metal trash dumpster had like crashed down on the floor above us. It was that loud. Within seconds, a secretary ran into our office. She was hysterical. She said, a plane has hit one of the towers, and it's like a war zone out there. Now, the minute she said that, I imagined a small little prop plane. I figured there was somebody piloting a small little plane. He had a heart attack or misdirection, and he crashed into the tower. So I was envisioning there was going to be the small end of a tower sticking out of the small end of the airplane sticking out of the tower. So I took the elevator and I went down to the lobby to go out into the street, mostly out of curiosity, just to see what it looked like. So these revolving doors you see, I took one of those out onto Day Street. And very symbolically, I look at it as I went through that revolving door, I had no idea that at that moment in time, I was leaving behind the life that I knew and was walking out into a life that I was totally unprepared for. In fact, this will show you right where I came out here on Day Street. And this is the first thing I saw. Paper everywhere. The ground was covered with it. It was ankle deep. It was paper coming from all the offices from the North Tower. And the white sheets of paper were just wafting down throughout the whole morning. I remember that, just sheets of paper coming down. So I started to walk towards Church Street, which is what the World Trade Center was on, looking at all the paper. And then I began to notice that there were pieces of asbestos and other things. And Dan, if you're here, my battery is running low. And is there a plug up here? Is Dan? Because I have my cord, luckily. Excuse me for a minute. Okay. No, lay down. That's a good boy. Lay down. Sorry for the little interruption here. I had charged this computer fully before I left. And I can't believe I have talked this long. So. But as I was saying, while he looks for the cord, the streets were covered with paper. As I walked, I noticed pieces of metal, pieces of drywall, all sorts of things lying in among the paper. And this, I think we can still work with this. Possibly, yes. Let's go back one. So I walked down out of my building and I walked to Church Street. This is Church Street, and there's the World Trade Center. So I stood there, and my first sight of the North Tower was this. Obviously, that was not a small little plane. I don't know how to describe it, except I describe it as a black canyon. There was smoke billowing, just billowing outside of the tower, along with flames shooting out. As I stood there, the other buildings were starting to evacuate. And so people were lining up or standing behind me. And we all just stood there on Church Street and looked up at that tower. And why I'm looking up is because the picture is there, and it's just reminding me of like being in the street and looking at that. We just stared at it because we couldn't comprehend it. I guess that's the word I'm thinking of. What this huge, massive hole was. And we could see people just in the streets, just looking, crying, hysterical. All of us trying to make sense of what it was we were seeing. And then we noticed that there were people hanging by the window ledges. If you look closer, you can see. A woman behind me screamed. And I looked closer at the tower to see why she was screaming. It's because she was seeing that. I consider those people who fell to their death the most courageous people. Because in a moment's notice, they had to make a decision. They had to choose how they were going to die. They were either going to be burned to death, die of smoke inhalation, or they were going to make a leap. And I witnessed many, many, many of them making that leap. And when they did, my instinct was, I started yelling out the word no. I was saying, no, no, as if my no was going to stop the people from falling. And I ran from where I was watching up into the plaza, and I can show you, I was standing right there under that eave, and you can see the North Tower was right across from me. Well, the center of the plaza wasn't as serene as that looks. It was filled with debris crashing down, pieces of metal, huge pieces of metal, glass. I remember the sound of the glass tinkling as it broke, almost sounding like hail as it came hitting the pavement. And I stood there and I wanted so desperately to run across to the North Tower. And I was going to say I don't know why, but I do know why. I knew the people had to be dead. But I kept thinking, if there was one person still alive, even if barely, I wanted to hold their hand. Because I didn't want anybody to die alone. Another man ran up to me at that point right beside me, and I turned and he said, "What do we do?" He said, "I don't know." And all we could do is look. And there was that moment's decision I had to make. Do I try to run for the tower and put my own life at risk? Or do I run to safety? And just then, there were two guards who were in building number 5. They were screaming at us, "Get in here, get in here." So we ran into building number 5. And as we went in there, it was like cattle being driven down steps, people going down the steps, pouring out into the street. So that then I was back on Church Street, and I was standing in front of the Century 21 store. I was standing there when I heard the second plane approach the tower. I remember the sound was so loud. I've never heard anything so loud. And when I looked up and saw the plane, it was so huge, so big. And at that moment, I saw that it was heading to the tower. I thought, the air traffic controllers, they've screwed up. They're messing up. That's what I thought had happened, that they were misdirecting the planes. And I thought, for sure, it will pull up just in time. Of course, it didn't. And with that explosion, metal, debris started raining down on us, and we literally all had to start running for our lives. At one point, I slipped and I fell flat down on the street, and people started trampling over me, stepping on me, and I thought then, I'm going to be trampled to death. But somehow I was able to get back up on my feet, and then I ran, along with everyone else, up to Fulton Street, which was here. As we were turning onto Fulton Street, up ahead of me there was a heavy-set man in a suit lying face down. Everyone was running past him because, you know, all this stuff was falling down. I ran past him, but then again, not quite sure why, I stopped. And I turned around and I ran back to him. And I got down on my knees, and it was then that I saw all the blood and where it was coming from. His skull had been split open. He was still alive, though unconscious. Another man knelt beside me. Someone said, "Take this." I reached up, I grabbed a denim jacket, we put it over the wound, and the other guy and I held our hands there, trying to stop the flow of blood. And by that time, ambulances were starting to come, and there was one down the street, and people were yelling, "Get up here, get up here." And at that point, someone who said they knew first aid suggested we turn him on his back. So we did, and as I said, he was a huge man, but we gingerly turned him over. I saw his watch laying on the side. It had come off. I picked it up and I put it in his pants pocket. And the one thing I regret to this day is that he had a name tag, an employee name tag with his name and where he worked. And I didn't think to look at it. I didn't think to look and see what his name was. Because if I had, I would have done whatever I could to find his family, to let them know that he was not alone. Because I'm sure he did not survive. In fact, I remember it was 2 weeks later, I went to my own regular doctor, and I explained that wound to him, and I said, "Do you think he could have made it?" And my doctor just shook his head. And I remember I just burst into tears and just sobbed for this man I didn't know, the man with the name tag that I didn't read. We got him up on the gurney. The ambulance had come. And as we were putting him in the ambulance, he was still unconscious, but I was rubbing his left arm, and I was whispering in his left ear, "You'll be okay. You'll be okay." When the ambulance left, I walked up to Broadway. My hands were covered with his blood, so one of the EMS workers came up to me. She thought it was mine. I said, "No, it's somebody else's." So she said, "Sit on the curb." I sat down on the curb, and I was shaking, and there was a man standing beside me in a suit, and he looked down at me. I looked up, and he just said, "Are you okay?" And that was the only person who asked me that question that day. And I just kind of shook my head. The EMS worker, she came over and started washing my hands off. And she was on her knees, kneeling in front of me, and I'll never forget this exchange. I looked at her right in her eyes, and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I don't know, but this is horrible." When she was finished, I stood up and saw some of my coworkers. I ran over to them and hugged them. Only later on, days later, they said that when they hugged me, I was shaking like a leaf. When I hugged them, I suddenly thought of my parents, who had moved to Millersville when my dad retired. I thought of them seeing this on TV and being worried about me. So automatically I thought, I've got to get to a phone, because I'd left my phone in my office. At that time, there were still payphones on the corners, and there were lines already, people trying to make phone calls. I started going up to people that I saw with cell phones, but nobody was getting reception. So I started to walk a few blocks north, and I ran into a deli, and I just said to the man, "Where's your phone? Can I use it?" And he just kind of like pointed. And I ran back to where his phone was, and I remember it was a Puerto Rican young girl on there, and she was crying hysterically, and she said something, and then she hung up. I picked up the phone. I couldn't remember my parents' phone number. The only phone number I could remember was a friend of mine who worked in Midtown. So I called him. I said, "Billy, it's Artie. Call my parents. They're in Millersville. Tell them I'm okay." And I hung up. And as I hung up and walked out of that deli, that's when the first tower collapsed. Those of us in the street didn't know that's what was happening. I thought another plane had hit another building, or there had been another explosion. But no, what was happening was the tower was collapsing. And you've seen the pictures of people running from that dust cloud. Though that isn't me, that somehow symbolizes how I felt. There were many other people in the street with me, but I just saw that cloud coming towards me. And I didn't know what was in it. I didn't know what it was. I just started running. I had never run so fast in my life. I ran till I couldn't run anymore. And I stopped and leaned over, and as I leaned over, I saw a woman's high heel shoe. And I wondered if she was still walking around with one shoe on. That's what was left of the place that I had fallen in love with. That was the World Trade Center. The concert stage where I used to listen to those concerts. The sphere in the center of the plaza. Somehow it was found intact among all the rubble. One of the small miracles, but one worth noting. That's the Century 21 store I was standing in front of when I saw the second plane. That was it afterwards. That was all of Church Street. You can see Century 21 is right there. That was it afterwards. That was the front of my building. The corner of my building. The side of my building that faced building number 5. That's all that was left. And then there were the faces of those who died. All of those are faces of people who died that day in September, the day that we're here to remember tonight. I believe you wanted to take an offering at this point, or offer a prayer.
So yes, we will offer a prayer and then receive an offering. The offering is to support the Still Waters ministry that Sam introduced to us. During the offering, we're going to have silence. seems like maybe the only appropriate way to remember. Before I lead in prayer, I'd like to say thank you, Artie, for honoring Still Waters in the effective work that they do by being here tonight. And I'd like to thank you for your courage in inviting us into how you experienced that tragic day. I commend you for your courage. Let's pray together. Almighty God, with the psalmist, we cry out that you, the God of justice, would avenge our enemies. God of justice, we're so grateful that chaos and madness and violence will not win the day. We're grateful that because of the work of Christ on the cross, death has been won over.